The train screeched into Ash Hollow with a shrill whistle, scattering dust across the depot like a storm. Folks had gathered in their Sunday coats and work aprons alike, curious about the passengers spilling out from the iron beast. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but silence fell when they saw her. A tall woman stepped down from the carriage, her cavalry cloak flaring in the hot wind. On her shoulder rested a heavy oak chest, yet she carried it as though it were no more than a satchel of bread. Gasps rose from the onlookers, half awe, half unease. Then chaos broke loose. From the corral at the edge of town, a stallion screamed and reared, snapping its reins. The beast tore into the street, dragging behind it a rattling cart stacked with barrels marked in black, gunpowder. Women shrieked, men scrambled, children were yanked back by frantic hands. The runaway horse thundered straight toward the crowd. And while the townsfolk scattered, only one figure moved forward, a man with gray at his temples, stepping into the path of destruction. Jax Miller lived apart from the world, and the world seemed content to forget him in return. His ranch lay past the Red Rock Canyon, a day's ride from Ash Hollow, where the land stretched wide and bare and the silence could make a man feel both safe and terribly alone. The fences sagged, the barn leaned to one side, and the paint on the old ranch house had long since surrendered to the wind, but it was his, and that was enough. At 33, Jax already carried the weight of a man twice his years. Gray threaded his dark hair, showing sharpest at the temples, and his skin was roughened by sun and weather. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, but something in the way he moved suggested caution, as though every step had to be measured before it was taken. He spoke little when he came to town, often just for salt, flour, or horse feed, and people got used to the idea that Jax Miller wanted no friends and sought no quarrels. His true companions were the horses. The ranch sat near a natural basin where wild mustangs sometimes came to water, and over the years Jax had gentled a few to the saddle. They knew his hands, trusted his quiet strength. With animals, there was no judgment, no gossip, no memory of past failures. Only the steady rhythm of work, feed, and care. It was among them that he could forget himself, if only for a while. But memory was a stubborn beast, harder to break than any stallion. The truth was, Jax had not always been this solitary figure at the canyon's edge. Once, he had been half of a pair, a brother bound by blood and by laughter. Eli Miller, 2 years younger, quicker with a smile, and far better at talking his way into and out of trouble, had been the heart of their small family. After their parents died of fever when Jax was just 20, the two brothers had leaned on each other to survive. Eli had been a dreamer, always chasing schemes, while Jax had been the steady hand, the one who fixed the roof, dug the wells, and made sure supper found its way to the table. But everything changed the night of the miners' fight. It was in Ash Hollow during the copper boom. The saloons spilled over with men half drunk on whiskey and half mad with hope of striking it rich. Eli, reckless as ever, had taken someone's side in a heated card game. Voices rose, fists followed, and in the confusion Jax had been shoved back, held off by 2 brawlers while he watched his brother slammed to the ground. A boot crushed Eli's knee before Jax could reach him. By the time he dragged Eli out of the fight, it was too late, the damage was done. The doctor said his brother would never walk the same again. Eli survived, yes, but the light in him dimmed. The boy who had once run across the ridges faster than coyotes was now a man bound to a crutch, the pain written plain across his face each morning. He worked where he could, tending books for the town blacksmith, but the injury had carved deep into him, into both of them. Jax never forgave himself. He told no one, but in his heart he believed he had failed. He had been strong enough to stop that fight, yet he had hesitated. Some part of him feared unleashing his strength, feared what would happen if he lost control. And because of that hesitation, his brother's life had been broken. From that night on, Jax withdrew. He stopped joining dances at the town hall. He stopped lingering in the saloon. He let his friendships drift away like tumbleweed. All that remained was Eli and the ranch. Their relationship was complicated now. Eli did not blame him, at least not openly. He would joke, grumble, and tease, pretending that his limp was just another piece of bad luck. But sometimes, when Jax caught his brother staring at the horizon with that look of quiet longing, the guilt would burn fresh. That was why Jax spoke so little. Words only reminded him of what had been lost. Silence was easier. Silence was safer. Yet silence is never truly safe, not forever. The world had a way of creeping back to a man who thought he had shut it out. Rumors traveled through Ash Hollow, carried on the lips of drifters and merchants. Whispers about new settlers, feuds between cattle barons, even about the railroad stretching closer each year. Jax ignored most of it. He thought none of it could touch him. But the truth was that every passing season was a change, and change had its own stubborn will. When the letter first appeared in his hands, Jax nearly tossed it into the fire without opening it. It had come in reply to a notice he'd posted months earlier, almost against his own nature. The words of that notice had been plain, nearly blunt. Rancher seeks companion for quiet life. Land steady, house in need of care. Right if willing. It had been Eli who pushed him into it. You can't live out here with nothing but horses forever, his brother had said, leaning on his crutch with a grin that dared him to argue. Even a mule needs company. So Jax had given in, half out of guilt, half out of weary hope. He did not dream of love. Such dreams felt far beyond him. But perhaps companionship, someone to ease Eli's burden, someone to tend the house and bring a little warmth back to the ranch. He had expected silence in return. But the letter had come. Emma Carver. The name was strong, the handwriting firm. She wrote of wanting a place to belong, of knowing work, of not fearing hard land. She asked for no riches, only steadiness. The words carried a weight that stirred something faint in Jax's chest, something he had thought buried long ago. Still, he hesitated. Letters were one thing. Real flesh and blood presence was another. What if she saw him for what he was? A man hollowed out by guilt, more comfortable with reins than conversation. What if she regretted coming the moment she stepped off that train? Jax had nearly written back to tell her not to come. But before he could, the date had been set. The train was already on its way. And so, on that dusty morning when the shriek of the whistle split Ash Hollow's silence, Jax Miller stood apart from the crowd, hat pulled low, waiting for a woman he had never met but who might, just might, force open the door he had spent a decade bolting shut. The blast of the train's whistle still echoed against the canyon walls when the disaster unfolded. The stallion's hoofs struck sparks against the hard-packed street, its mane flying like black fire. The barrels of gunpowder clattered and rolled in the cart behind it, each jolt threatening to turn Ash Hollow into a smoking crater. Mothers clutched their children. Men ducked into doorways, and the sheriff himself froze halfway to drawing his revolver, realizing a single bullet could set off the barrels. In the midst of the chaos, one figure broke from the crowd. The tall woman in the cavalry cloak hurled the oak chest from her shoulder as though it weighed nothing. It hit the dirt with a heavy thud, scattering dust, and in the same movement she lunged toward the screaming beast. Her hand closed on the reins just as the stallion barreled toward the depot steps where a boy had stumbled and fallen, too frightened to move. The woman swung herself sideways, using her full weight to pull the horse's head away from the child. The stallion shrieked, reared high, and for a breathless instant the barrels wobbled dangerously. Then, crack! The harness snapped, sending the cart skidding aside and crashing into the trough by the smithy. The barrels tumbled free, rolling and banging against each other, but they did not ignite. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of settling dust. The boy was alive, trembling. He stared up at the woman who had shielded him with her own body. She bent, lifted him easily into her arms, and carried him out of the street. His face pressed into her cloak, leaving smears of soot, but she only tightened her grip. The people of Ash Hollow watched in stunned awe. Jax Miller, standing not 10 paces away, felt something stir inside him that he had not known in years. He had stepped forward, yes. His boots had carried him toward the danger almost without thought, but it was she who had acted swift and fearless. He could not remember the last time he had seen another soul move with such certainty, such raw instinct to protect. For so long he had believed that burden was his alone. Now, as he watched the stranger hold the boy against her shoulder, he felt something break open inside him. Relief. The child she had saved was Thomas Dyer, the blacksmith's son. Everyone knew the boy, bright-eyed, always underfoot at the smithy, forever asking questions no one had time to answer. His father, Saul, shoved his way through the crowd now, his massive hands shaking as he reached for his son. The woman relinquished the boy with quiet gentleness, as if she had carried children all her life. "Ma'am," Saul stammered, his voice breaking. There ain't words." But the woman only shook her head. "See to him. He's safe now." Her voice was low, calm, touched by a trace of accent no one in Ash Hollow could place. For a long moment, the depot remained hushed. Then whispers began, rippling like wind through tall grass. "Who is she? Did you see the way she lifted that chest? Cavalry cloak. Must have been with the army." The sheriff finally found his tongue. He cleared his throat and tried to look authoritative. "Miss, that was a dangerous stunt. Coulda got yourself killed." She met his gaze without flinching. "And if I hadn't, a boy would be dead." The sheriff faltered, tugged at his collar, and looked away. Jax felt the corner of his mouth twitch, half admiration, half recognition. This was no ordinary woman stepping off the train in search of a home. This was someone who carried shadows of her own. He took a step closer, though he wasn't sure why. The crowd shifted, and suddenly she was in front of him. The cloak stirred in the hot wind, her face framed by loose strands of dark hair. Her eyes, sharp, steady, yet haunted, met his, and for the first time Jax Miller forgot how to breathe. "Name's Emma Carver," she said simply. "I believe you're the one I came to meet." The words struck harder than the echo of the stallion's hooves. Jax opened his mouth, closed it again, and finally managed, "I'm Miller, Jackson." He almost never gave his full name, but in that instant it seemed important. Emma Carver, the woman from the letters. He had imagined someone smaller, softer, maybe timid after a long journey west. Instead, here she stood, tall, unyielding, her presence commanding the very silence of the street. And she had saved a child's life before even setting foot inside Ash Hollow proper. The townsfolk lingered, hungry for answers, but Emma did not speak again. She only reached down, lifted the oak chest as though it were made of pine, and gestured toward the wagon Jax had brought. Without a word, she carried it there herself. As she passed, the boy Thomas wriggled free of his father's grip and ran after her. "Miss, you were like a soldier, like a real hero." Emma crouched briefly, resting a hand on his shoulder. Her expression softened, though it did not lose its weight. "No, lad. Heroes are the ones who keep going even when they're afraid. You remember that." The boy nodded solemnly, as if she had given him a treasure greater than gold. When Emma rose again, her gaze brushed Jax's. For the first time since the miners' fight all those years ago, he felt that strange ache in his chest, something between longing and dread, something he had thought himself too hardened to feel. She was not what he had expected, but perhaps that was exactly what he needed. The sun dipped lower that evening, laying long shadows across Ash Hollow. The depot crowd had finally dispersed, but the air still buzzed with talk of the woman who had stepped off the train and wrestled death itself in front of half the town. Emma Carver. Her name was already on everyone's lips, carrying tones of both admiration and unease. In a place where most folks valued predictability, someone who broke every expectation unsettled the balance. Jax Miller sat on the bench outside the general store, hat tilted low, watching her from across the street. She stood near the wagon, arms folded, her cavalry cloak shifting in the warm wind. Eli was beside him, leaning on his crutch, whistling low. "Well, brother," Eli murmured. "Seems you've gone and fetched yourself a lioness instead of a lamb." Jax grunted. "Didn't fetch anything." Eli gave him a sidelong glance. "Oh? Then what's that letter you posted? Rancher seeks companion. Quiet life. Remember?" Jax didn't answer. His stomach felt like someone had tied it in a knot. In his mind, he had imagined a simple arrangement. Company for the ranch, another pair of hands to help with the work, maybe a bit of warmth to soften Eli's days. But Emma Carver wasn't simple. She carried herself like a woman accustomed to storms, not quiet meadows. Still, when she caught his eye from across the street, Jax rose without thinking. His boots carried him toward her as if commanded by something stronger than his own hesitation. "You'll be wantin' supper," he said awkwardly. "It's a ride out to the ranch. Best to start before nightfall." Emma gave a small nod. "Lead on." She didn't waste words. Didn't ask how far or what kind of place it was or whether she would like it there. She simply picked up her chest, again with that effortless strength, and hoisted it into the wagon. Jax caught Eli's grin out of the corner of his eye and pretended not to see. The ride to the ranch was long, the canyon road turning red and gold in the last light of day. For a while, silence stretched between them. Jax guided the horses steadily, the reins sure in his calloused hands. Emma sat beside him, back straight, eyes scanning the horizon like a soldier measuring the lay of the land. It struck him that she seemed more alert than most folks who first came west. She didn't gawk at the mesas or the hawks wheeling overhead. She looked for exits, cover, shadows. Finally, she spoke. "You wondered about the cloak." Jax kept his gaze ahead. "Figure it's not just for show." "No," she said, her voice low. "I served with the cavalry. Not as a soldier. As a nurse. They called it hospital duty. I learned to bind wounds, cut away gangrene, stop bleeding with whatever was at hand. I saw more blood in those years than I care to remember." Jax glanced at her. The fading light etched her face in sharp relief. Strong cheekbones, steady eyes, but lined with fatigue that went deeper than travel. "You left the army?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "I left, but the army didn't quite leave me." The words hung heavy. Jax didn't press her further, but he felt the shape of something unsaid, like a storm beyond the horizon. By the time they reached the ranch, night had settled fully, stars burning sharp in the desert sky. Eli had ridden ahead and already set a lantern in the window. The old house looked worn but welcoming, its walls glowing faintly with the promise of warmth. Inside, Emma set down her chest by the door and looked around. The place bore a man's rough touch, functional, sparse, but clean. A worn table, 2 sturdy chairs, shelves lined with tools instead of decorations. The smell of wood smoke clung to everything. "This will do," she said simply. Jax cleared his throat. "Ain't much. It's more than I had yesterday," she replied. They ate in silence beans, bread, a sliver of dried beef. Eli tried to draw her into talk, asking where she had traveled from, what kind of work she'd done before. She answered briefly but with honesty. No lies, but no unnecessary details either. Jax found himself listening more than speaking, measuring each pause, each flicker of expression. Later, when Eli had gone to his room, Emma remained by the table, her hands folded on the wood. She studied Jax with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably in his chair. "I should tell you something," she said at last. Jax raised his eyes. "Go on." "There are men who will come looking for me," Emma said. Her tone was calm, almost clinical, as though delivering a diagnosis. "They wore the same uniform I once did. Officers, soldiers. They want silence from me, because I know things they'd rather keep buried. Theft, corruption, supplies meant for soldiers sold for private profit. I kept records. I can testify." Jax felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. "And they know you're here?" "They know I left the East," she said. "Word travels faster than I'd like. It won't be long before they track me." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Jax thought of the canyon water, the mustangs that drank from it, the fragile life he had built on solitude. He thought of Eli, his brother who had already lost too much. Trouble was the last thing Jax wanted at his door. Yet when he looked at Emma Carver, sitting upright and unafraid, he knew what choice he would make. "You can stay here," he said at last. His voice was steady, though his heart pounded. "My land's quiet. hard to reach. If they come, they'll find no help from me. Emma's eyes softened, though she did not smile. You don't even know me. Jax met her gaze. I know enough. You stepped into fire today when no one else would. That's more than I can say for half this town, and more than I've managed in a long while. Something unspoken passed between them then, an understanding born not of romance but of recognition. Two people scarred by their pasts, neither trusting easily, yet both unwilling to let another fall. That night, as Jax lay awake listening to the desert wind, he felt the weight of his decision. He had opened his door to danger, but he had also taken a step forward, perhaps the first real step he had made since the night Eli's life had changed forever. And though he did not know what storm was coming, he was no longer alone in facing it. The desert dawn came cold and pale, laying frost on the corral fence and painting the canyon walls in muted pink. Jax was already awake, chopping wood near the barn, the steady rhythm of axe on log echoing through the silence. He liked the early hours. They gave him time to think before the day pressed in. But this morning, his thoughts were heavy, circling the same truth Emma had spoken the night before. Men were coming. Men in uniform. Men who would not care for his land, his brother, or the fragile peace he had pieced together. From the house, the smell of coffee drifted, stronger than usual. Emma had risen early too. She was on the porch, cloak pulled tight against the chill, eyes scanning the horizon as though expecting riders already. Jax noticed the way her hand lingered at her hip, where no weapon hung, and wondered how many nights she had spent in vigilance before reaching Ash Hollow. Eli limped out a moment later, yawning. He carried a mug Emma must have poured for him. "Brother," he said with a smirk, "your mail-order bride looks more like a sentry on watch." Emma turned her head sharply, but Jax only grunted. "She's not," he began, but the words tangled in his throat. He split another log with a crack that echoed louder than needed. By mid-morning, the ranch had settled into uneasy routine. Emma helped mend a fence, her hands quick and sure despite the coarse wire. Jax tried not to stare, but he found himself watching how easily she fit into the rhythm of work, how naturally she stooped to scratch one of the barn cats, how little complaint she gave when her fingers bled from the wire. She was not here for comfort, that much was plain. It was nearly noon when the first rider appeared at the canyon's mouth. A cloud of dust followed, and soon more shapes took form, 5, 6, then a dozen men on horseback. The sun glinted on their buckles, their polished boots, and the sharp steel of rifles slung across their shoulders. At their head rode a man in an officer's coat of deep blue, the brass buttons gleaming. His face was handsome in a hard, clean way, but his eyes were pale and calculating, like chips of ice. Emma stiffened. "Clay," she murmured almost to herself. Jax felt a cold weight settle in his gut. "You know him," she nodded, her jaw tight. "Captain Nathan Clay. He oversaw supplies in the regiment. He's the one who stole them. Food, bandages, gunpowder, all sold to profiteers while soldiers bled. I kept records. He knows I can prove it." The riders halted a short distance from the ranch gate. Dust swirled around them, catching the light like smoke. Clay raised a hand in greeting that felt more like a claim. "Miller," his voice carried easily, trained for command. "We've come on business. Step out and talk." Jax set his axe aside, wiped his palms on his trousers, and walked to the gate. Emma remained on the porch, her face unreadable, though her knuckles whitened against the railing. Eli shifted beside her, unease plain in his stance. Clay smiled as Jax approached. It was a smile without warmth. "Fine bit of land you've got here. Quiet, out of the way. Canyon water must run strong this time of year." Jax said nothing. The officer leaned slightly in his saddle. "Here's the matter plain. The Army has need of this water source. Too valuable to leave in private hands. You'll sign papers, transfer rights to us. We'll give you a fair sum. In return, we'll see that you and your kin move along without trouble." Jax's jaw clenched. He had heard promises like that before from mining companies and railroad men. Fair sums that turned to scraps, rights that vanished with ink on paper. The canyon water was life itself, not just for his ranch but for Ash Hollow. Without it, the town would wither. And the woman? Jax asked, his voice low. Clay's smile widened. You've met her, then? Yes, she's wanted for questioning. Army business. Dangerous to harbor her, Miller. She's got wild ideas, lies really about good men who served their country. Hand her over, and we'll consider your cooperation in better light. On the porch, Emma's eyes locked with Jax's. She did not plead, did not speak, but the weight of her trust pressed on him. For a moment, he felt that old weakness, the same paralysis that had gripped him the night Eli was hurt. The memory of his brother on the saloon floor, gasping in pain, while Jax's fists hung useless at his sides. The shame of inaction. But something in him shifted now. Perhaps it was the image of Emma stepping into the stallion's path without hesitation. Perhaps it was the long years of silence that had finally worn thin. Jax drew a slow breath and spoke clearly. She stays here, and the water stays with the town. The men behind Clay stirred, restless. The officer's smile faltered. Careful, rancher. Think on your position. You're one man against the United States Army. Army or no, Jax said, his voice steady. This land's mine, and I won't hand over a soul to men who'd sell their own soldiers short. For the first time, Clay's eyes hardened with open hostility. You'll regret that. He yanked his reins, wheeling his horse. Enjoy your courage while it lasts, Miller. We'll be back, with papers, with orders, and with enough force to see them signed. The riders turned as one, a thunder of hooves fading into the canyon dust. When silence returned, Jax stood at the gate, shoulders tight, hands clenched. Emma came down from the porch slowly, her cloak brushing the dirt. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, Jax answered. His voice was rough but certain. I did. Eli hobbled up behind them, eyes wide. Brother, that was Clay. He's not bluffin'. He'll bring more men. The whole town'll be caught in it. Jax looked toward the horizon where the dust still hung in the air like smoke from a coming fire. His stomach churned, but his voice was firm. Then we'll be ready. The threat had grown. The storm was rolling fast toward Ash Hollow, and for the first time in years, Jax Miller knew he would not run, not hide, not stay silent. This time he would stand. The days after Clay's visit hung heavy with dread. Word spread quickly, carried from the canyon to the saloon, from the mercantile to the smithy's forge. Folks lowered their voices when Jax's name was spoken, glancing toward the horizon as though expecting soldiers to ride through the dust at any moment. Ash Hollow had seen its share of trouble. Outlaws, mining disputes, feuds over cattle. But this was different. This was the United States Army, or at least men wearing its colors, coming with papers, guns, and the authority to take what they claimed was theirs. And in the center of it stood Jackson Miller, a rancher who had long tried to live invisible. Jax spent those days in quiet preparation. He repaired fences, filled barrels with water, sharpened tools that might double as weapons. Emma worked beside him, calm but watchful, as though bracing for a fight she had lived through before. Eli muttered about fool's errands and impossible odds, but Jax caught the flicker of pride in his brother's eyes when he thought Jax wasn't looking. On the fourth evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, the town bell clanged. A summons. The sheriff was calling the people to the town hall. Jax knew before stepping through the doors that Clay would be there. The hall was crowded, lantern light flickering against wooden walls. Farmers, miners, shopkeepers, even the preacher, all gathered with nervous faces. At the front, standing with polished boots planted wide, was Captain Nathan Clay. 24 men in uniform flanked him, rifles stacked by the wall. Their presence filled the room with a heavy silence. Clay's voice carried easily as he addressed the townsfolk. People of Ash Hollow, you've thrived in the desert because of the canyon water. But that water belongs to the nation. Orders have come down. The source must be secured for military use. Rancher Jackson Miller has refused to cooperate. That refusal endangers your town. You must decide. Stand with your government, or stand with a man too stubborn to see reason. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Some men nodded uneasily. Others kept their eyes fixed on the floor. Fear weighed heavier than loyalty. Emma stepped forward from the crowd. She removed her cloak, revealing the plain dress beneath, and her voice rang out steady. The water isn't for the army. It's for profiteers. Clay has stolen supplies for years, food, bandages, powder, and sold them. I was there. I kept the records. I can prove it. Gasps broke out. Clay's smile thinned. Lies, he spat. This woman deserted her post. She'd say anything to save her skin. But Emma reached into her chest, the same chest she had carried from the train, and drew out a packet of papers. Faded, smudged with dust, but still legible. She held them high for all to see. These are requisition forms, signed by Clay, for supplies that never reached the soldiers they were meant for. I took them before I left. Ask yourselves how many of your sons, brothers, husbands suffered because he sold their rations. The room shifted. The murmurs grew sharper, angrier. Jax felt the moment teeter like a wagon on the edge of a cliff. He knew then that he had to speak. His throat tightened, but he forced himself forward, boots heavy on the wooden floor. Most of you know me, he began, his voice rough. Or you used to. I've kept to myself these years. Too much. I told myself silence was safer. But silence cost me once. Cost my brother his future because I didn't step in when I should have. I won't make that mistake again. The crowd turned toward him. Faces he had avoided for years now watched with rapt attention. This town lives on that canyon water, Jax continued. Take it away and Ash Hollow dies. Clay wants you to believe it's for the army. But it's for his pockets. You hand it over, and you'll be paying tribute to him until your wells run dry. I won't stand for that. And I won't hand over a woman who's risked her life to tell the truth. Clay's face hardened, the charm stripped away. He stepped forward, boots striking sharp on the boards. Big words, Miller. Let's see if you've the spine to back them. I challenge you, pistols at dawn. Prove your courage like a man. The hall hushed. A duel. Old brutal, final. But Jax shook his head slowly. No. A murmur of confusion rippled. Clay sneered. Afraid. I've killed enough by silence, Jax said. His voice rose, steady now, strong enough to carry to every corner of the hall. I won't kill to prove myself. I'll stand here, in front of all of you, and tell the truth. If that's not enough, then this town has already surrendered. The words hung like thunder after lightning. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Saul the blacksmith, still shaken from the day Emma saved his son, stepped forward. His deep voice rumbled. Miller's right. My boy would be dead if not for this woman. I believe her. Others followed, farmers, merchants, miners who had once fought beside Jax in saloon brawls, even the preacher. One by one they spoke, their courage kindled by his. The tide turned. The townsfolk began to close ranks, their numbers swelling against the polished line of Clay's soldiers. And those soldiers, seeing the anger of a whole town rising like a storm, shifted uneasily. They had come for profit, not a massacre. Clay's voice cracked like a whip. Hold your ground. But his men exchanged glances and did not move. One by one they lowered their eyes. Some even stepped back. You see, Captain, Jack said, his voice calm now. Your power only holds as long as people stay silent. Not today. Clay's face twisted with fury. He lunged as if to draw his pistol, but half the hall surged toward him. The sheriff, emboldened at last, stepped in, hand on Clay's arm. Enough. Get out of Ash Hollow. The officer's eyes burned with hatred, but he saw the truth. His power was broken here. With a snarl, he shoved free and stormed toward the door. His soldiers followed, abandoning their stacked rifles, leaving behind only the echo of boots on the dirt street. When the doors swung shut, a heavy silence remained. Then, slowly, the people began to cheer. Not wild, not raucous, but steady, growing, a sound of relief and resolve. Jack stood still amid the noise, heart pounding. Emma stepped beside him, her papers still in hand. She looked at him not with triumph, but with quiet understanding. "You did it," she said softly. "No," Jax replied. His voice caught. "We did." And for the first time in more than a decade, Jackson Miller felt the crushing weight of silence lift from his chest. The dust from Captain Clay's boots had long settled by the time Ash Hollow found its rhythm again. The town moved forward cautiously, like a horse after a hard storm, skittish yet eager for the calm. For weeks, the people spoke in hushed tones about that night in the hall. The defiance, the papers Emma had shown, the way Clay's own men turned their backs on him. It became a story told at the saloon and around kitchen tables, one that grew with every retelling. But for Jax, the victory wasn't in the tale. It was in the silence that followed, the kind not born of fear, but of peace. At the ranch, life resumed in ways Jax hadn't dared to imagine. The canyon water, once a looming shadow, now flowed freely, secure under the town's collective protection. Men from Ash Hollow came in groups to build stronger ditches and channels, ensuring the ranch and the fields beyond would never run dry again. Jax worked among them, his shoulders broad, his hands calloused, but for the first time, he didn't work alone. Emma was there too, sleeves rolled, directing with a keen eye born from years of discipline. She moved with quiet certainty, as though the land had been waiting for her. Eli thrived in her presence. Though his limp remained, his spirit seemed lighter. He would sit on the porch whittling wood, telling Emma stories of his boyhood with Jax. Half-truths and tall tales that made her laugh until tears shone in her eyes. Sometimes she would hand him a basket of mended clothes or a jar of preserves, and Eli would mutter about being treated like a child. But when Jax caught him smiling, the bitterness he had carried since his injury softened. Emma's laughter filled spaces that had long been empty. Jax found himself smiling more too. At first, it was awkward, as if his face had forgotten how. But gradually it became natural. When Emma teased him about the way he always checked the corral twice, when Eli rolled his eyes at their quiet glances, when the evening sky painted the canyon in hues of copper and violet, and he felt, at last, that he was not standing there alone. One evening, as autumn cooled the air and the cranes began their migration overhead, Jax and Emma walked the ridge above the ranch. The sky was vast, painted in streaks of orange and pink, the river below glinting like a ribbon of fire. Emma carried no cloak this time, no chest of secrets, only herself. "You could have let me go," she said quietly, her voice almost lost to the wind. "When Clay came, you could have stayed silent like before." Jax stopped, his boots scuffing against the dry earth. He looked out over the canyon, where the water shimmered in the fading light. "I thought about it," he admitted. "The old me would have done it. But watching you stand there, strong, unafraid, it reminded me that silence ain't the same as peace. I've been hiding all these years, convincing myself I was protecting Eli, protecting the ranch. Truth is, I was protecting myself from feeling the weight of what I'd lost. You broke that silence." Emma studied him, her eyes steady, the same eyes that had stared down a raging stallion, an explosion, and a room full of soldiers. "And now," he turned to her fully. For once, the words came without hesitation. "Now, I don't want quiet without you in it." The wind caught her hair, lifting it like a banner. She smiled then, small but real, and reached for his hand. Her fingers were calloused like his, shaped by work and hardship. Together, they stood, watching the cranes soar across the sunset. Life didn't transform overnight. The ranch still demanded long days, feeding cattle, mending fences, clearing fields. Ash Hollow still quarreled over prices and mining rights. But the air was different. The town, once resigned to bend before power, now carried a backbone it hadn't known it possessed. And the Miller Ranch, once a lonely refuge, became a place where people gathered. Neighbors came to share meals, to trade, to talk. Emma often sat with the women, teaching them remedies she had learned in the cavalry hospitals. Children played by the stream, their laughter echoing in the canyon. Eli, too, found purpose beyond his bitterness. With Emma's encouragement, he began crafting leather goods, saddles, bridles, boots, selling them in town. His hands, though twisted by his injury, proved deft with tools. For the first time in years, he spoke of the future as if it belonged to him. One night, as they sat by the fire, Emma sewing by lamplight and Eli carving a new piece of leather, Jax leaned back in his chair and listened. The crackle of the flames, the rhythm of their work, the soft hum of Emma's voice. It was the music of home. His chest ached, but not with sorrow. It was a fullness he had never expected to feel again. Months later, when spring rolled across the prairie, Ash Hollow held a fair to celebrate the planting season. The town square was bright with bunting, fiddles played, and children darted between stalls. Jax, unused to crowds, stood awkwardly at the edge until Emma tugged him into the dance. Her laughter carried over the music, and for the first time in his life, Jax let himself move without fear of eyes watching. Around them, the townsfolk cheered, not just for the dance but for what they represented. The man who had found his voice, and the woman who had helped him use it. That night, as they rode home beneath a sky crowded with stars, Jax glanced at Emma and said, "Funny thing, I always thought the ranch was the end of the road. Turns out it was just the beginning." Emma tilted her head, smiling softly. "Beginnings don't come easy out here, but they're worth it." When they reached the ranch, Eli was waiting on the porch, a lantern glowing at his side. He greeted them with mock impatience, muttering about chores undone. But when Emma teased him, he laughed freely, the sound carrying into the quiet night. Jax paused, watching them. His brother, whole in spirit if not in body, and the woman who had walked into Ash Hollow carrying more than just a chest. She had carried change, strength, and a piece of his heart he hadn't known was missing. As the lantern light flickered and the cranes called faintly in the distance, Jax finally allowed himself to breathe. The water flowed, the ranch thrived, and the silence around him was no longer empty. It was alive, filled with laughter, love, and the promise of days yet to come. And so, at sunset and at dawn, standing on the ridge above the canyon, Jackson Miller no longer watched the horizon with fear. He watched it with hope.